The air in the small chapel on the outskirts of Boston felt heavy, as if it carried the weight of every unspoken word between us. I stood at the altar, my hands trembling as they clutched a bouquet of carnations, their soft petals a stark contrast to the coldness that surrounded me. The moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting fractured patterns of blue and silver across the stone floor. But it offered no warmth. I was a bird in a gilded cage, wings clipped by a promise I never wanted to make. My father stood a few steps behind me, his head bowed in a mixture of shame and desperation. Once a proud businessman, he was now a broken man, humbled before Nathan Sterling, the man who had agreed to save our family's crumbling company on one condition: that I become his wife. Nathan stood beside me, his presence as unyielding as the black suit he wore, tailored to perfection. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, stared straight ahead, refusing to meet mine as the priest's voice droned on, binding us in a vow that felt more like a sentence. There were no smiles, no applause, no joyous music to mark the occasion. The pews held only a handful of witnesses: my younger brother James, a few distant relatives, and Nathan's lawyer, who watched with the detached efficiency of someone finalizing a business deal. The chapel was silent save for the faint rustle of my white dress, a simple gown I hadn't chosen, and the echo of the priest's words: "Do you, Charlotte Bennett, take Nathan Sterling to be your lawfully wedded husband?" I wanted to scream, to run, to tear the veil from my head and flee into the night. But I couldn't. My father's voice echoed in my mind, his plea from earlier that day still raw. "You have to do this, Charlotte. For the family. For the family." Those words had become a chain around my neck, pulling me into this moment. I thought of my mother, her gentle smile and the lessons she'd taught me before cancer stole her away. "Always hold on to our family's honor, Charlotte," she'd said, her voice weak but firm. "It's the one thing no one can take from you." I reached up to adjust the pearl necklace she'd given me, her last gift, my fingers brushing against the cool beads to hide the tremor in my hands. "I do," I whispered, my voice barely audible, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. Nathan's response was just as hollow, a curt "I do" that carried no trace of emotion. The priest pronounced us husband and wife, and I felt Nathan's hand take mine for the briefest moment, his grip firm but devoid of warmth, a silent warning rather than a gesture of love. I pulled away as soon as I could, my heart pounding against the cage of my ribs. As we turned to face the sparse congregation, I caught James's eye. My little brother, always my protector despite being younger, looked at me with a mixture of anger and helplessness. I knew he wanted to storm the altar, to drag me out of this nightmare, but he stayed rooted in his seat, his fists clenched. I forced a small smile, a silent promise that I'd be okay, even if I didn't believe it myself. The moonlight outside the chapel was brighter now, a full moon hanging low in the sky, its glow both beautiful and cruel. It illuminated the path as we stepped out, Nathan leading the way to a sleek black car waiting to take us to his penthouse in the heart of Boston. I glanced back at the chapel, at the life I was leaving behind, and felt a tear slip down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly, refusing to let Nathan see my weakness. He didn't deserve my tears. "You'll get used to it," Nathan said suddenly, his voice low and devoid of empathy, as if he were commenting on the weather. I turned to him, my eyes narrowing, the first spark of defiance igniting within me. "Get used to what?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "Being sold like a piece of property, or being married to a man who can't even look at me?" For the first time, Nathan's gaze met mine, and I saw a flicker of something, anger, perhaps, or surprise, before it vanished behind his icy facade. "Your father sold you, not me," he said coldly. "I'm just the one who paid the price, And trust me, Charlotte, I'm no happier about this than you are." His words stung, a brutal reminder of the truth I couldn't escape. My father had betrayed me, trading my future to save his own. And now I was bound to a man who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. I turned away, staring out the car window as the city lights blurred past. My reflection in the glass, a ghostly image of the woman I used to be. I thought of my mother again, her words about honor echoing in my mind. She'd taught me to be strong, to hold my head high even in the darkest moments. I straightened my shoulders, my resolve hardening. I might be trapped in this marriage, but I wouldn't let Nathan Sterling break me. I would survive this for my mother's memory, for my brother, for the family honor she'd held so dear. As the car pulled up to Nathan's penthouse, I took a deep breath, clutching the pearl necklace for strength. This was my new reality, a world of cold luxury and colder hearts. But I would find a way to endure. I had to. The elevator ride to Nathan's penthouse felt like an eternity, the soft hum of the machinery the only sound breaking the silence between us. I stood as far from him as the small space allowed, my arms crossed tightly over the white fabric of my wedding dress, the bouquet of carnations long since discarded in the car. Nathan stared straight ahead, his jaw set, his presence as unyielding as the steel walls around us. When the doors finally slid open, I stepped into a world that was as breathtaking as it was cold. The penthouse spanned the top floor of a sleek high-rise in the heart of Boston, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. The lights of the city twinkled like stars against the night sky, but their beauty felt distant, untouchable. The interior was a study in modern luxury, dark hardwood floors, minimalist furniture in shades of black and gray, and abstract paintings that hung on the walls like silent sentinels. It was a space designed to impress, not to comfort, and I felt like an intruder in its sterile perfection. Nathan gestured toward a hallway without looking at me. "You can stay in the guest room," he said, his voice as cold as the marble beneath my feet. "I don't need a real wife." The words cut deeper than I expected, a reminder of the transactional nature of our marriage. I nodded silently, too exhausted to argue, and followed the direction he'd indicated, my heels clicking softly against the floor. The guest room was as impersonal as the rest of the penthouse, with a king-sized bed draped in crisp white linens, a sleek dresser, and a single chair by the window. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the reality of my situation sank in. I was alone in a stranger's home, bound to a man who saw me as nothing, more than a clause in a contract. The weight of it all pressed down on me, threatening to crush what little strength I had left. I sank onto the bed, still in my wedding dress, and pulled the knitted shawl my mother had made for me from my small bag. It was a soft, pale blue, the stitches uneven in places where her hands had trembled from illness. But it was the most precious thing I owned. I wrapped it around my shoulders, the familiar scent of her lavender perfume clinging to the fibers. And for a moment, I could almost feel her arms around me. "You're stronger than you think, Charlotte," she'd told me once, her voice weak but steady. "Don't ever let anyone take that from you." Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. I wouldn't give Nathan the satisfaction of seeing me break, even if he wasn't here to witness it. I stood and walked to the window, the full moon still visible in the sky, its light casting a silver glow over the city. It was the same moon that had watched me take my vows just hours ago, a silent witness to my sacrifice. I pressed my hand against the cool glass, my reflection staring back at me, a pale, hollow version of the woman I used to be. "I won't let him see me weak," I whispered to myself, the words a vow of my own. A faint sound from the other side of the penthouse caught my attention, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, my curiosity outweighing my exhaustion. The sound came again, a low, clipped voice, unmistakably Nathan's, drifting from a room at the end of the hall. I moved closer, my bare feet silent against the floor, and paused outside what I assumed was his study. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear him speaking on the phone, his tone as cold as ever. "She's just a part of the deal," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, nothing more. A pause, then a sharp, "No, I don't care what she thinks. This isn't about her." The words hit me like a physical blow, confirming what I'd already suspected. I was nothing to him, a means to an end, a pawn in whatever game he was playing. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, and turned away before he could catch me listening. Back in the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed, the shawl still wrapped around me like a shield. I thought of the life I'd left behind, the small apartment I'd shared with my brother James, the job I'd loved at a local charity, the dreams I'd once held of a love that was real, not bought. All of that was gone now, replaced by this cold, glittering prison. But I wouldn't let it define me. I couldn't. I stood again, my resolve hardening with each step as I walked to the mirror on the dresser. My reflection looked back at me, the wedding dress a stark reminder of the day's events, but my eyes held a spark of defiance. I reached up to unclasp the pearl necklace my mother had given me, setting it carefully on the dresser, and began to unpin my hair, letting it fall in loose waves around my shoulders. I would survive this marriage, I told myself. I would hold on to who I was, no matter how hard Nathan tried to strip that away. The moonlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in its ethereal glow, and I felt a flicker of hope amidst the despair. This was my new reality, but it wouldn't break me. I would find a way to endure, for my mother's memory, for my brother, for the family honor she'd taught me to cherish. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to make Nathan Sterling see me as more than a contract. The dining room in Nathan's penthouse was as cold and polished as the rest of his world. A long glass table sat at the center, surrounded by sleek, black chairs, and a chandelier above cast a soft glow from its crystal prisms, the light flickering like tiny flames. The table was set for 3. Nathan, myself, and a business associate he'd invited to dinner. He'd insisted I join them, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We need to keep up appearances," he'd said, his voice as detached as ever. So here I was, dressed in a simple black dress that felt more like a costume than clothing, playing the role of the dutiful wife. I adjusted the linen napkin on the table, smoothing out a non-existent wrinkle, a nervous habit I'd picked up from my mother. She used to do the same thing before every family dinner, her hands always busy, her smile always warm. The memory brought a pang of longing, but I pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. I couldn't afford to let my emotions show, not in front of Nathan, and certainly not in front of a stranger. Nathan sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his dark suit as impeccable as always. Across from me was his associate, a man named Edward, whose sharp eyes and calculating smile made me uneasy. He was older, with graying hair and a voice that carried the weight of authority, the kind of man who thrived in the cutthroat world of high finance. Nathan spoke to him in low, measured tones, discussing mergers and acquisitions, their conversation a labyrinth of numbers and strategies I couldn't follow. I sat silently, my hands folded in my lap, feeling like a decorative piece rather than a person. Edward turned to me suddenly, his smile widening in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "You two don't seem much like newlyweds," he remarked, his tone laced with curiosity. "No honeymoon glow, no stolen glances. Is something wrong?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine, and I felt my stomach twist. I glanced at Nathan, hoping for some kind of support. But his expression remained unreadable, his gaze fixed on Edward. "We understand each other in our own way," Nathan replied, his voice smooth but cold, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. The words were a dismissal, a shield, but they cut me deeper than I expected. I was nothing to him, a prop in his carefully curated life, a means to an end. I forced a smile, my fingers tightening around the stem of my water glass, the cool surface grounding me against the storm of emotions brewing inside. But then I caught something, a fleeting moment that made my breath catch. As I reached to pour more water into my glass, Nathan's eyes flicked toward me, just for a second. It wasn't the cold, detached stare I'd grown accustomed to. There was something else there, something softer, almost conflicted, as if he were seeing me for the first time. The moment passed as quickly as it came, his attention returning to Edward, but it left me unsettled, a crack in the icy wall he'd built between us. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of small talk and clinking cutlery, Edward's questions about our marriage mercifully ceasing. When he finally left, the penthouse fell into a heavy silence, the kind that pressed against my chest like a physical weight. Nathan stood and began clearing the table, his movements precise and mechanical, as if he were trying to erase the evening entirely. I watched him for a moment, then stood to help, needing something to do with my hands. "Why do you even bother with these charades?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended as I stacked the plates. "If I'm just a part of your deal, why drag me into your world like this?" Nathan paused, a wine glass in his hand, his back to me. For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer, but then he turned, his blue eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart skip. "Because appearances matter, Charlotte," he said, his tone clipped. "You want feelings? This isn't a fairy tale. It's a contract." His words stung, a brutal reminder of my place in his life. But I refused to back down. "And what about my feelings?" I shot back, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "Do you ever think about what this is doing to me? Or am I just another line item in your ledger?" Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. But he turned away, setting the glass down with a deliberate clink. "You knew what this was when you agreed to it," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Don't pretend otherwise." I wanted to scream, to throw the plates at him, to demand that he see me as more than a transaction. But I didn't. Instead, I turned and walked back to my room, my hands shaking as I closed the door behind me. I sank onto the bed, my chest tight with unshed tears, and pulled out my phone. I needed to hear a familiar voice, someone who understood me. I called. James, my younger brother, the one person who'd always been my rock. "Charlotte," he answered on the first ring, his voice thick with concern. "Are you okay?" "No," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to do this, James. I don't know how to be his wife." "You don't have to be," he said fiercely. "You don't have to put up with this. Come home, Charlotte. We'll figure it out." "I can't," I whispered, the weight of my father's debt pressing down on me. "I have to do this. For Dad. For us." James was silent for a long moment, and I could almost see him clenching his fists, his protective instincts warring with his helplessness. "I hate this," he said finally. "I hate that you're stuck with him." "I know," I said, my voice steadier now. "But I'll be okay. I promise." As I hung up, I looked out the window at the city lights, the full moon still high in the sky. Nathan's words echoed in my mind, but so did that fleeting look in his eyes. There was more to him than he let on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that beneath his cold exterior, there was a man who might be just as trapped as I was. The penthouse felt more like a mausoleum than a home, its silence suffocating as I stood on the balcony, the cool night air brushing against my skin. I'd slipped out of my room after the disastrous dinner, needing to escape the weight of Nathan's words and the hollow role I was forced to play. The full moon hung low in the sky, its silver light casting long shadows across the city below, a quiet witness to my turmoil. I wrapped my mother's knitted shawl tighter around my shoulders, the soft wool a comforting reminder of her strength, and tried to steady my breathing. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a marriage that felt more like a prison, bound to a man who saw me as nothing more than a contract. My thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound from inside the penthouse, a drawer closing, followed by the rustle of papers. Curiosity tugged at me, overriding my exhaustion. Nathan was still awake, and something about the way he'd spoken earlier, the coldness in his voice when he'd called me a part of the deal, gnawed at me. What deal? What was he hiding? I stepped back inside, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor, and followed the sound to his study, the door slightly ajar. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. I knew I shouldn't be here, that I was crossing a line, but I needed answers. I pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, the room dimly lit by a single desk lamp. The study was as meticulous as the rest of the penthouse. Bookshelves, lined with leather-bound volumes, a sleek desk with a laptop, and a few framed awards on the wall. But my attention was drawn to a small wooden box on the desk, its lid slightly askew, as if Nathan had been looking through it before I arrived. I opened the box, my heart pounding, and found a stack of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. The A, top one, caught my eye, the handwriting sharp and angular, unmistakably Nathan's. I unfolded it carefully, my breath catching as I read the words. I will never forgive the Bennett family. They took everything from me. The letter was dated 10 years ago, and as I skimmed further, the pieces began to fall into place. My father had once been a business partner of Nathan's father, and a failed deal had led to the collapse of the Sterling family's company, driving them into ruin. Nathan's mother had died shortly after, her health shattered by the stress, and Nathan blamed my father for it all. I felt the blood drain from my face, the letter trembling in my hands. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience. It was a vendetta. Nathan hadn't married me to save my family. He'd done it to punish us, to make us pay for the sins of the past. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, a mix of anger and betrayal surging through me. I wasn't just a pawn in a business deal. I was a weapon in his revenge. What the hell are you doing? Nathan's voice cut through the silence, sharp and furious. I spun around, the letter still in my hand, to find him standing in the doorway, his eyes blazing with a rage I'd never seen before. He stormed over, snatching the letter from my grasp with a force that made me flinch. You have no right to touch my things, he shouted, his voice echoing in the small room. I stood my ground, my own anger rising to meet his. I have every right, I shot back, my voice trembling but firm. You've been lying to me, Nathan. This marriage, it's not about saving my family, is it? It's about revenge. You're punishing me for something my father did, something I had no part in. Nathan's jaw clenched, his hands tightening around the letter until the paper crumpled. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but then he spoke, his voice low and raw, each word dripping with pain. You think I wanted this? He said, his eyes locking onto mine. You think I wanted to be tied to you, to your family after everything they did? I had no choice, Charlotte. My father lost everything. My mother died because of your father's greed. I had to take back what was mine. His words were a knife to my heart, but they also revealed a vulnerability I hadn't expected. For the first time, I saw the man behind the mask, the boy who'd lost his mother, the son who'd been forced to rebuild a shattered legacy. But I couldn't let that soften me, not after what I'd just learned. I'm not my father, Nathan, I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. You can't punish me for his mistakes. If you hate me so much, then let me go. I don't need you. Nathan's expression faltered. A flicker of something. Guilt, perhaps, or regret, crossing his face. He turned away, his shoulders tense, and I took a step toward the door, my hand brushing against the desk. The pearl necklace my mother had given me slipped from my wrist, clattering to the floor, the sound sharp in the tense silence. I froze, my heart lurching as I bent to pick it up, but Nathan was faster. He knelt down, his fingers closing around the delicate strand, and for a moment, he just stared at it, his expression unreadable. He stood slowly, holding the necklace out to me, his movements careful, almost reverent. "I don't hate you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how to do this, how to be with you, how to let go of the past." His words hung in the air, a confession I hadn't expected, and I felt a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. I took the necklace from him, my fingers brushing against his, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the man he might be beneath the anger and the pain. But I couldn't let myself hope, not yet. I turned and left the study, the moonlight streaming through the windows as I walked back to my room, the weight of Nathan's secrets heavy on my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let him destroy me. I would fight for my own honor, for my family, for the woman I was meant to be. The ballroom at the Boston Harbor Hotel glittered like a jewel, its chandeliers casting a golden glow over the crowd of elegantly dressed guests. I stood at the edge of the room, my hands smoothing the fabric of my emerald green gown, a color Nathan had chosen for me to wear to this charity gala. "It matches your eyes," he'd said earlier. His tone clipped, but with a flicker of something I couldn't quite place, something that made my heart stutter despite my resolve to keep him at a distance. But now, as I watched him move through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging polite smiles with the city's elite, I felt more like a prop than a wife, a decorative piece in his carefully curated image. The gala was a high-profile event, the kind of affair where every smile was calculated, every word weighed for its impact. I'd been dreading it ever since Nathan told me we'd be attending, but after the revelation in his study, the letter that exposed his vendetta against my family, I knew I had to be here. I needed to understand him, to see the man he presented to the world, even if I couldn't trust the one I'd glimpsed in private. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. A murmur rippled through the crowd, heads turning toward a group of reporters near the entrance, their cameras flashing like a swarm of fireflies. I caught snippets of their conversation. Sterling, Bennett, scandal, and my stomach dropped. Before I could process what was happening, a headline flashed on a nearby screen, part of a live news feed. Bennett family implicated in Sterling financial collapse. Decades-old betrayal exposed. The words hit me like a punch, and I felt the blood drain from my face. The story detailed my father's role in the failed business deal that had ruined Nathan's family, accusing him of embezzlement and deceit. The press had spun it into a salacious tale of greed and revenge, painting me as a gold digger and Nathan as a vengeful tycoon who'd married me to settle an old score. The room seemed to close in around me, the whispers of the guests growing louder, their eyes darting between me and Nathan. I wanted to disappear, to run from the humiliation, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I glanced at Nathan, expecting to see the same cold indifference he'd shown me since our wedding, but his expression was unreadable, his jaw tight as he scanned the crowd. Then a voice cut through the noise, sharp and mocking, drawing everyone's attention. "Well, well, if it isn't the happy couple," Victor Langston drawled, his voice dripping with venom. Victor was a rival of Nathan's, a man known for his ruthless ambition and penchant for stirring trouble. He sauntered over, a glass of champagne in hand, his smirk as sharp as a blade. "Tell me, Charlotte," he said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Do you really think you're worthy of Nathan Sterling?" A woman from a family of liars and thieves? Or is this just another transaction for you? The words were a slap, and I felt my cheeks burn with shame. My hands trembled at my sides, but I forced myself to meet Victor's gaze, refusing to let him see me crumble. "You don't know anything about me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. But Victor only laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the suddenly silent room. Before I could say more, Nathan was at my side, his presence a sudden, towering force. He stepped between me and Victor, his hand closing around mine in a grip that was firm but not painful, a silent anchor in the chaos. "She's my wife," he said, his voice low and dangerous, each word carrying the weight of a warning. "And if you ever speak to her like that again, Victor, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life." The room seemed to hold its breath, the tension crackling like electricity. Victor's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Touchy, aren't we?" he said, his tone light but his eyes cold. "I'll leave you to your little charade, Sterling." He turned and walked away, but the damage was done. The reporters surged forward, their cameras flashing, their questions a relentless barrage. "Mr. Sterling, is it true you married her for revenge?" "Ms. Bennett, did you know about your father's crimes?" I felt like I was drowning, the lights and voices overwhelming, but Nathan's hand never left mine. He pulled me closer, his arm sliding around my waist as he guided me through the crowd, his expression a mask of controlled fury. We made it to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the prying eyes, and he finally released me, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Why did you do that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart still racing from the confrontation. "I didn't need you to protect me." Nathan turned to me, his blue eyes blazing with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Because I needed to," he said, his voice raw, almost desperate. "I needed you, Charlotte. I didn't realize it until now." His words hung in the air, a confession I hadn't expected, and for a moment, I saw the man beneath the mask, the man who'd lost his mother, who'd built an empire on the ruins of his family's legacy, who'd been carrying the weight of his pain for so long. I remembered a story he'd told me once, late at night, after a rare moment of vulnerability, about his mother teaching him the meaning of honor. "It's not about power," she'd said. "It's about protecting what matters." Was that what he was doing now? Protecting me? I wanted to believe it. But the sting of the scandal, the weight of his past vendetta, still lingered. "You don't get to say that," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. "Not after everything you've done. Everything you've hidden." Nathan's expression softened, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I know," he said quietly, "but I'm starting to see things differently. I'm starting to see you." I didn't know how to respond, my emotions a tangled mess of hope and distrust. The moonlight streamed through a nearby window, casting a silver glow over us, and I felt a shift, a crack in the wall between us. But I wasn't ready to let it crumble. Not yet. I turned and walked away, the sound of the Gala fading behind me, my heart heavy with the weight of what I'd just witnessed. The hospital corridor was a stark contrast to the glittering world I'd left behind at the Gala. Just hours ago, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh white glow over the linoleum floor, and the air smelled of antiseptic and fear. I sat in a hard plastic chair outside my father's room, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, the emerald green gown I still wore a jarring reminder of the night's chaos. My father had suffered a stroke, the call coming just as Nathan and I had returned to the penthouse, and I'd rushed to the hospital without a second thought, leaving Nathan behind. Leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to steady my breathing. The doctor's words echoed in my mind. He's stable for now, but it was a close call. We'll need to monitor him closely. I couldn't lose my father. Not after losing my mother. Not after everything I'd sacrificed to save our family. I reached for his hand through the open door, his frail fingers cold against mine, and felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I'd been so angry with him for forcing me into this marriage, for trading my future to save his own. But now, seeing him so vulnerable, I realized how much I still loved him. The sound of footsteps pulled me from my thoughts, and I looked up to see Nathan standing at the end of the corridor, his dark suit slightly rumpled, his expression unreadable. He'd followed me here, despite the late hour, despite the tension that still lingered between us after the gala. I stood, smoothing the wrinkles from my gown, and met his gaze, my heart a tangled mess of gratitude and suspicion. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice hoarse from hours of worry. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," he said simply, his tone softer than I'd ever heard it. He took a step closer, his blue eyes searching mine, and for the first time, I saw genuine concern in them. It was disarming, and I didn't know how to respond. I turned back to my father's room, unable to hold his gaze, and focused on the steady beep of the heart monitor, a lifeline in the chaos. A nurse approached, her clipboard in hand, and handed me a stack of paperwork. "Ms. Bennett, we need to go over your father's billing information," she said, her voice gentle but firm. I nodded, flipping through the pages, but froze when I saw the payment history. The hospital bills, tens of thousands of dollars, had been paid in full, month after month, long before my father's stroke. The name on the account wasn't mine, or my father's. It was Nathan Sterling's. I turned to him, the papers trembling in my hands, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've been paying for his treatment?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. "All this time, even after everything my father did to your family." Nathan's jaw tightened, and he looked away, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer, but then he spoke, his voice low and raw. "I didn't want you to lose him," he said, his eyes still fixed on the floor. "Not like I lost my mother." The confession hit me like a tidal wave, and I felt the air rush out of my lungs. I remembered the letter I'd found in his study, the pain in his words when he'd written about his mother's death, how the collapse of his family's company had broken her health, her spirit. He'd blamed my father for it all, had married me as part of a vendetta, and yet here he was, quietly ensuring that I wouldn't suffer the same loss he had. It was a sacrifice I never could have imagined from the man I'd thought he was. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking as tears welled in my eyes. "After everything my father did, after everything you've said, why would you do this?" Nathan finally met my gaze, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Tears shimmering in his eyes, a vulnerability he'd never shown me before. "Because I know what it's like to lose someone you love," he said, his voice trembling. "My mother died alone, Charlotte. I couldn't save her, but I could save you from that pain. I didn't want you to go through what I did." The weight of his words settled over me, and I felt the walls I'd built around my heart begin to crumble. I stepped closer, my hand reaching out to touch his arm, and he didn't pull away. "Nathan," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you." He looked down at my hand on his arm, then back at me, his expression a mix of guilt and something softer, something I couldn't quite name. "I've been wrong about a lot of things," he said quietly. "About you, about this marriage. I thought I could keep you at a distance, but I can't. Not anymore." Before I could respond, he pulled me into his arms, his embrace warm and steady, a stark contrast to the coldness I'd come to expect from him. I froze for a moment, caught off guard by the sudden closeness. But then I melted into him, my tears soaking into his shirt as I let myself feel the weight of everything, the fear, the anger, the gratitude. For the first time since our wedding, I didn't feel alone. We stood there in the hospital corridor, the beeping of the heart monitor a quiet rhythm in the background, and I felt a shift between us, a bridge forming over the chasm that had separated us. Nathan's arms tightened around me and I heard him whisper, "I'm sorry, Charlotte, for everything." I pulled back just enough to look at him, my hands resting on his chest, and saw the man I'd glimpsed beneath the mask, the man who'd lost so much, who'd carried his pain like a shield, but who was now letting me in. "We'll figure this out," I said, my voice steady despite the tears. "Together." The moonlight streamed through a nearby window, casting a silver glow over us, and I felt a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. My father was still here, and Nathan was more than I'd thought he was. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nathan's office, casting a warm glow over the sleek mahogany desk and the city skyline beyond. I stood near the door, my hand smoothing the fabric of a simple navy dress I'd chosen for the day, a stark contrast to the emerald gown I'd worn at the gala. Nathan sat behind the desk, his dark suit as impeccable as ever. But there was a softness in his posture now, a quiet vulnerability that had emerged since our moment in the hospital corridor. We'd barely spoken since that night, the weight of his confession and our shared embrace lingering between us like an unspoken promise. But today, I had a purpose, a mission to reclaim my family's honor, and I needed Nathan's help to do it. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and stepped forward and stepped. "Nathan," I said, my voice firm but not harsh, "we need to talk about Victor Langston." He looked up from the papers on his desk, his blue eyes meeting mine with a mix of curiosity and caution. I continued, my resolve hardening with each word. "He's the one who leaked the story about my father to the press. He's trying to destroy us, both of us. I want to hold a press conference to set the record straight. I need your help to make it happen." Nathan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable for a moment, and I braced myself for rejection. I knew how he felt about my family, how deeply the wounds of the past still cut, even after his sacrifice for my father's medical bills. But I also knew that something had shifted between us, that the man who'd held me in the hospital wasn't the same man who'd married me for revenge. "You don't have to do this, Charlotte," he said finally, his voice low, almost gentle. "I can handle Victor. I'll make sure he pays for what he did." I shook my head, stepping closer to the desk, my hands resting on its edge as I leaned forward. "This isn't just about Victor," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "This is about my family's honor. My father made mistakes, but I won't let his past define us. I need to do this. For him, for James, for myself. I need to show the world that we're more than the lies Victor is spreading." Nathan studied me for a long moment, his gaze searching, and I saw a flicker of admiration in his eyes, a recognition of the strength I'd fought so hard to hold on to. He stood, rounding the desk to stand in front of me, and I noticed the slight disarray of his tie, a small imperfection in his otherwise flawless appearance. Without thinking, I reached up to adjust it, my fingers brushing against the silk as I straightened the knot. He froze, his breath catching, and I felt a warmth spread through me at the simple act of closeness, a quiet intimacy that hadn't existed between us before. "All right," he said finally, his voice softer now, his hand covering mine for a brief moment before he stepped back. "We'll do it your way. I'll arrange the press conference, but you need to be prepared. This won't be easy." "I know," I replied, my hand lingering where his had been, the warmth of his touch still tingling on my skin. "But I'm ready." The press conference was scheduled for that afternoon in a sleek conference room at Sterling Enterprises headquarters. I stood at the podium, the cameras flashing like a storm of lightning, the reporters' questions a relentless barrage. Nathan stood beside me, his presence a steady anchor, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back as I faced the crowd. I took a deep breath, clutching the pearl necklace my mother had given me for strength, and began to speak. "My name is Charlotte Bennett Sterling," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. "And I'm here to set the record straight. My father made mistakes in the past, mistakes that hurt Nathan's family. And for that, I am deeply sorry." I paused, glancing at Nathan, and saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, followed by a nod of encouragement. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "But I also want to tell you about the man standing beside me. Nathan Sterling has been paying for my father's medical treatment for months, despite the pain my family caused him. He did it to spare me the loss he endured when his mother passed away. That's the kind of man he is, not the vengeful tycoon the headlines have painted him to be." The room erupted in murmurs, the reporters scribbling furiously, their cameras zooming in on us. I felt Nathan's hand tighten on my back, a silent gesture of support, and I turned to him, my eyes meeting his. "I'm not here to erase the past," I said, my voice softer now, directed at him as much as the crowd. "But I am here to build a future, one where we can heal, where we can honor the families we've fought for." Nathan's expression softened, a rare warmth in his eyes, and he stepped closer, his voice low but audible to the microphones. "Charlotte is right," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. "I've held onto my anger for too long, but she's shown me what it means to fight for something greater, for family, for honor. I'm proud to stand with her today." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in, and then the questions started again, a flurry of voices demanding more. But Nathan ignored them, his hand finding mine and squeezing gently, a silent promise that we were in this together. As we stepped away from the podium, he pulled me into a quiet corner of the room, away from the cameras, and looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race. "You were incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion, his thumb brushing against my knuckles. "I've never met anyone as strong as you, Charlotte." I smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign after so many weeks of pain. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said, my voice trembling with gratitude. "Thank you, Nathan, for standing with me, for believing in me." He reached up, his hand cupping my cheek, and I leaned into his touch, the warmth of his palm grounding me. "We're a team now," he said, his voice a quiet vow. "No more secrets, no more revenge. Just us." The moonlight streamed through a nearby window, casting a silver glow over us, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. We were far from perfect, but we were moving forward, together. The air was crisp and fragrant with the scent of wildflowers as I stood on the balcony of Nathan's penthouse, the same balcony where I'd sought solace on that first lonely night after our wedding. A year had passed since then, a year of pain, growth, and unexpected love, and tonight, we were celebrating a new beginning. The full moon hung low in the sky, its silver light bathing the city in a soft glow, a quiet witness to the journey we'd taken. I wore a simple white dress, not the stiff gown of our first wedding, but one I'd chosen myself, flowing and light, a symbol of the freedom I'd found in loving Nathan. We'd decided to renew our vows, to mark the end of the cold contract that had bound us and the start of a marriage built on trust and love. The ceremony had taken place earlier that evening, in the same small chapel where we'd first said our vows. But this time, it was different. My father, now recovered from his stroke, had walked me down the aisle, his hand steady in mine, his eyes bright with pride and gratitude. James had stood as my witness, his protective scowl replaced by a genuine smile, and the pews were filled with a few close friends and family, their laughter and applause a stark contrast to the silence of that first day. But the moment I'd cherish most was when Nathan had looked at me, his blue eyes shimmering with emotion, and said his vows. Not the rote words of a priest, but his own, spoken from the heart. "I promise to stand by you, Charlotte," he'd said, his voice steady but thick with feeling. "To honor you, to love you, not as a contract, but as my partner, my equal, my home." I'd felt tears slip down my cheeks as I'd spoken my own vows, promising to love him through every storm, to be his strength as he'd been mine. Now, as the night deepened, we'd return to the penthouse, the place where our story had begun, to share a quiet moment together. I leaned against the balcony railing, the moonlight catching the pearl necklace around my neck. My mother's necklace, a talisman of her love and the honor she'd taught me to hold dear. Nathan stepped out to join me, his dark suit replaced by a simple white shirt and trousers, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, a relaxed ease in his posture that I'd come to love. He came to stand beside me, his hand finding mine, his fingers intertwining with my own in a gesture that felt as natural as breathing. "You look beautiful," he said softly, his voice warm, his gaze tracing the lines of my face as if he were seeing me for the first time. I smiled, a genuine smile that came from a place of peace I hadn't known I could find. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "For everything, Nathan. For standing by me, for helping me save my family, for loving me." He turned to face me fully, his other hand coming up to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing against my skin in a tender caress. "You changed me, Charlotte," he said, his voice thick with emotion, a rare vulnerability in his eyes that made my heart ache. "I thought I knew what I wanted. Revenge, control, a life without attachments. But you showed me what it means, to truly live, to love, to fight for something greater than myself." His words brought tears to my eyes, and I leaned into his touch, my hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. "And you gave me a family," I said, my voice trembling with gratitude. "A real one. Not just the one I was born into, but the one we've built together. I never thought I'd find that, not after everything we went through." Nathan's hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and I felt the warmth of his breath against my lips as he spoke, his voice a quiet vow. "I once thought love was a weakness," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "But you proved me wrong, Charlotte. Love is strength, and we've found it, together." He kissed me then, a slow, tender kiss that spoke of promises kept and futures shared, and I melted into him, my arms wrapping around his neck as I kissed him back with all the love I'd come to feel. The moonlight bathed us in its glow, a silver halo around us, and I felt a sense of completeness I'd never known before. This was what I'd dreamed of as a girl, not the cold contract of our first wedding, but this, a love that had grown. From the ashes of pain, a partnership forged in fire. We pulled back, our foreheads resting together, and I smiled through my tears, my fingers tracing the lines of his face. "I love you, Nathan," I said, the words a truth I'd fought so hard to reach. "I always will." "I love you too," he replied, his voice a soft echo of my own, his arms tightening around me as if he'd never let go. We stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's embrace, the city lights twinkling below us, the full moon above a silent witness to our love. Thought of my mother, of the lessons she'd taught me about honor and family, and I knew she'd be proud of the woman I'd become. I thought of my father, of James, of the family we'd fought to save, and I felt a deep gratitude for the man who'd stood by me through it all. Nathan and I were far from perfect, but we were whole, two broken pieces that had found a way to fit together, to create something beautiful. As we stood there, the moonlight reflecting in Nathan's eyes, I saw our future, a life of love, of laughter, of challenges we'd face together. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we'd found our happiness, a happiness hard-won and all the more precious for it. The shadows of our past had finally given way to light, and under the full moon, we were home. If you've been touched by this journey of love, honor, and redemption, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to have you join our community for more heartfelt stories that inspire and uplift. Let's keep spreading the light together. See you in the next video.